Trade policy. Trade policy is a collection of rules and regulations which pertain to trade. Every nation has some form of trade policy in place, with public officials formulating the policy which they think would be most appropriate for their country. Things like import and export taxes, tariffs, inspection regulations, and quotas can all be a part of a nation's trade policy. Some nations attempt to protect their local industries with trade policies which place a heavy burden on importers, allowing domestic producers of goods and services to get ahead in the market with lower prices or more availability. Others eschew trade barriers, promoting free trade, in which domestic producers are given no special treatment and international producers are free to bring in their products. Let us take a quick look at trade policy of India over a period of years. Import substitution. Definition: government strategy that emphasizes replacement of some agricultural or industrial imports to encourage local production for local consumption rather than producing for export markets. Import substitutes are meant to generate employment, reduce foreign exchange demand, stimulate innovation, and make the country self-reliant in critical areas such as food, defense, and advanced technology. The industrial policy that we adopted was closely related to the trade policy. In the first 7 plans, trade was characterized by what is commonly called an inward-looking trade strategy. Technically, this strategy is called import substitution. This policy had its own objectives, each of which has been discussed in detail. Objectives of import substitution. The policy of import substitution aimed at the following: replacing or substituting imports with domestic production. For example, instead of importing vehicles made in a foreign country, industries would be encouraged to produce them in India itself. In this policy, the government protected the domestic industries from foreign competition. Protection from imports took 2 forms: tariffs and quotas. Let us understand these terms in greater detail. Looking from the perspective of import substitution, tariff is a tax levied on imported goods. They make imported goods more expensive and discourage their use. Quotas specify the quantity of goods which can be imported. The effect of tariffs and quotas is that they restrict imports and therefore protect the domestic firms from foreign competition. The policy of protection is based on the notion that industries from developing countries are not in a position to compete against the goods produced by more developed economies. It is assumed that if the domestic industries are protected, they will learn to compete in the course of time. Our planners also feared the possibility of foreign exchange being spent on import of luxury goods if no restrictions were placed on imports. Nor was any serious thought given to promote exports until the mid-1980s. Effect of policies on industrial development. The achievements of India's industrial sector during the first 7 plans are very impressive. The proportion of GDP contributed by the industrial sector increased from 11.8% in 1950-51 to 24.6% in 1990-91. The rise in the industry's share of GDP is an important indicator of development. The 6% annual growth rate of the industrial sector during the period is commendable. No longer was Indian industry restricted largely to cotton textiles and jute. In fact, the industrial sector became well diversified by 1990, largely due to the public sector. The promotion of small-scale industries gave opportunities to those people who did not have the capital to start large firms to get into business. Protection from foreign competition enabled the development of indigenous industries in the areas of electronics and automobile sectors, which otherwise could not have developed. In spite of the contribution made by the public sector to the growth of the Indian economy, some economists are critical of the performance of many public sector enterprises. Public sector's contribution to the economy was to a greater extent in the initial stages of the economy. It is now widely held that state enterprises continue to produce certain goods and services, often monopolizing them, although this was no longer required. Provision of telecommunications service is one such example. The government had the monopoly of this service even after the private sector firms could also provide it. Due to the absence of competition, till even the late 1990s, one had to wait for a long time to get a telephone connection. Another example could be the establishment of Modern Bread, a bread manufacturing firm, as if the private sector could not manufacture bread. In 2001, this firm was sold to the private sector. The point is that no distinction was made between what the public sector can do alone and what the private sector can also do. The examples are as follows. For example, even today, only the public sector can supply national defense and free medical treatment for poor patients. And even though the private sector can manage hotels well, yet the government also runs hotels. This has led some scholars to argue that the state should get out of areas which the private sector can manage, and the government may concentrate its resources on important services which the private sector cannot provide. Many public sector firms incurred huge losses, but continue to function because it is very difficult, almost impossible, to close a government undertaking, even if it is a drain on the nation's limited resources. This does not mean that private firms are always profitable. There have been instances where private firms, which were on the verge of closure due to mounting losses, were nationalized to protect the jobs of the workers. Another area which needs mention is the need to obtain a license to start an industry. The need to obtain a license to start an industry was misused by industrial houses to a great extent. A big industrialist would get a license not for starting a new firm, but to prevent competitors from starting new firms. The excessive regulation of what came to be called the permit license Raj prevented certain firms from becoming more efficient. More time was spent by industrialists in trying to obtain a license or lobby with the concerned ministries rather than on thinking about how to improve their products. The protection from foreign competition is also criticized on the ground that it continued even after it proved to do more harm than good. Due to restrictions on imports, the Indian consumers had to purchase whatever the Indian producers produced. The producers were aware that they had a captive market, so they had no incentive to improve the quality of their goods. Besides being protected from foreign competition, the need to improve the quality of their products was not thought necessary, as the end consumer had no other option available for procuring from any other source. It is competition from imports which forces our producers to be more efficient, lest they be thrown out of the market altogether. There are many arguments in favor of public sector put forth by scholars. One of them being that the public sector is not meant for earning profits, but to promote the welfare of the nation. They should be evaluated on the basis of the extent to which they contribute to the welfare of the people and not on the profits they earn. Regarding protection, some economists held that We should protect our producers from foreign competition as long as the rich nations continue to do so. Owing to all these conflicts, economists called for a change in our policy. This, along with other problems, led the government to introduce a new economic policy in 1991. To conclude, the first 7 plans, trade was characterized by what is commonly called an inward-looking trade strategy, technically termed as import substitution. This policy aimed at replacing or substituting imports with domestic production. In this policy, the government protected domestic industries from foreign competition. Excessive government regulation prevented growth of entrepreneurship. In the name of self-reliance, Indian producers were protected against foreign competition, and this did not give them the incentive to improve the quality of goods that they produced. Our policies were inward-oriented, and so we failed to develop a strong export sector. The need for reform of economic policy was widely felt in the context of changing global economic scenario, and the new economic policy was initiated in 1991 to make our economy more efficient.